I'm Bailey Young, professor of history at Eastern Illinois University since 1994. And before that, I taught in Chicago for a bit. I taught in Massachusetts for a bit. And before that, I taught for about 10 years in France. How did I get to France? How did I become a medieval archaeologist? It started when I was a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania, and I went over to England and to Ireland, where I excavated an Iron Age early Christian site with my professor Bernard Wales. And when I went to France to work on my dissertation, I wanted to work on how archaeology helps us understand the story of the end of the Roman Empire and the development of Christianity. So I got into contact with French archaeologists, and before you knew it, there I was excavating in Paris. I was excavating down around in front of Notre Dame. I was excavating up on top of Montmartre, where there was an important pilgrimage site connected with the cult of Saint Denis. I became close to Patrick Perrin, who was reinventing Merovingian archaeology, and to this day we often work together. I've just come back from a conference at the National Museum of Archaeology, of which he is now the director. So in the 1970s and 80s, I was involved in a number of excavations in France. In the south of France, near Montpellier, I worked with a team from Williams College. My undergraduate work was at Williams, excavating a medieval abbey called Salmody. And this was really a wonderful, picturesque place, but watch out. Mosquitoes bite you at night, and no-see-ums bite you during the day. It's a swampy region. I worked with Christian Sapin, who is one of France's leading medieval religious architecture scholars today in the French National Science Research Center. Christian and I excavated a number of sites in Burgundy, particularly the site of a church in Autun. If you go there today, it looks like a barn, because that's what it became at the French Revolution. But we were able to show that it's one of the very oldest Christian sites in France. That goes all the way back to before the Emperor Constantine, when the place was called Gaul. And I excavated quite a number of burials there. When I came to Eastern, and Professor Lasky asks me to set up a program for honor students to be able to excavate in Europe, I got in touch with my old friend Raymond Brulé, also a very well-known Merovingian archaeologist, who directs the National Archaeology Center for Belgium, for the French-speaking part of Belgium, Wallonie, at the University of Louvain. And he suggested that Herb and I come over and he would show us a potential site. This proved to be the site of Wallen Castle. This is just a wonderful site. We have the ruins of a 12th century round tower. It goes back to the days of Richard the Lionheart. Standing up, you can actually go inside and walk up the stairs. But it also had the site of the medieval estate center, what's called the Outer Bailey, which was completely accessible for excavation, granting that you got the permission of the landowner, who's a farmer, who was using it as a pasture for his cows. So we came to an agreement. He would move his cows elsewhere for the month it takes us to excavate, and we would fill in the trenches afterwards so the cows could come back for the winter. So we got this program off the ground in 1998, and it has an important pedagogical aspect. We are teaching students about how to approach history both through historical sources and through scientific methodology, and we're actually setting them to work to do the excavation. But this is not just a practice thing, this is a real research excavation. Dr. Brulé and I and Dr. Laurent Versleep, who is now professor of archaeology at Louvain-la-Neuve and who is about to succeed Professor Brulé as director of the National Research Center, he and I sat down and came up with a plan to study the evolution of this site from the very earliest times. We checked the historical records that were available, and we discovered that the site was mentioned in a number of charters as belonging to a lord who was an important vassal of the Count of Brabant in the 1100s and 1200s. What was intriguing here was that the round tower, which is the oldest part that you can see, dates to around 1200. We know this because it has the same shape as the tower that the King of France, Philip Augustus, built in his palace at the Louvre, which you can see now if you go to the Louvre. They've excavated the foundations and you can walk around them. Before that, they didn't build these round towers so much, they built square ones. But we know that there was a Lord of Wallan as far back as the year 1000. So what was going on the site for the 200 years or so where we don't have standing remains? Could it have been that there was an earlier wooden architecture phase which we could find traces of if we excavated? Well, that was our early hypothesis. And as we dug in the area of the Outer Bailey, we found, first of all, that this was very much built up around the time of Queen Elizabeth, around 1500, when the historical sources tell us that the site belonged to one of the great figures in the court of the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. But we were relieved to see that underneath these early modern vestiges of probably a great kind of stable for horses, we found remains of the medieval farming estate that we were looking for. And we found that the terrace above the floodplain that the Outer Bailey was built on, it wasn't a natural elevation. Much of it was deliberately built up the way a mound like Monk's Mound at Cahokia was deliberately built up. And the person who established that for sure is Bill Woods, who excavated Monk's Mound at Cahokia. So you know that I'm taking it from a good source. So we did a lot of excavation out there in the Outer Bailey in the first years of our project, and we were able to show that the castle was the result of extraordinarily sophisticated earth engineering, to which masonry, stone masonry construction was then added. The original stone tower, as I said, dates to around 1200, but between 12 and 1300, a fortified courtyard was added with a great big fortified stone gate, a drawbridge, 3 corner towers, and this involved extraordinary resources. So it shows us that the people who were building Wallan, and I say the people, but we know the names of the lords in those days from the charters, people like Lord Arnold V, clearly they were highly successful, very powerful local figures who were trusted by and working closely with the great feudal lord, the Duke of Brabant. Then, about 1310, Arnold V died without a male heir, and work at the castle stopped for some time. The castle became the property of his daughter, who married into a different family and moved away. So the castle was neglected for some time, and during this time its military usefulness became negligible as kinds of warfare changed. Now you had armies using artillery and highly professional soldiers. A little castle like this was nothing. But as an estate center, as a country residence, it was still very desirable, and that's why about 1450 Antoine de Glime bought it, bought the land, bought the lordship, bought the rights over the peasants and so forth. And we have these engravings that were done sometime after this, which show the wonderful mansion that he had built in the old castle. We know something about it from these iconographical sources. We know something about it from account books that have survived. Antoine and his successors kept very careful records of the money they spent, and these, a lot of them have survived, and we've been able to study them. So one of the exciting things about our project as a research project is that we can bring together what we learn about the site from looking at historical records with what we learn about the site from excavating, from stratigraphy, from analysis of the soil to find out what kinds of plants were being grown and so forth. We've already done a preliminary report for the Belgian authorities, more than 400 pages with great stratigraphies in it. And now we're working on the next one. The first report focused on the outer bailey. The next one will focus on the excavations we've been doing since 2005 in the inner fortified courtyard, and most recently we've been concentrating on the remains of the 15th century mansion.